Flying Circus. An introduction. The game. Flying Circus is a role-playing game about the fantasy and reality of being a flying ace in the days of early air combat. Over the course of the game, players will take their ramshackle aircraft into battles, find triumph in defeat, get blackout drunk, and have ill-advised sex with each other, and find a way to somehow pay for it all. There will be heroes and scoundrels, knight-errants, and killers for hire, and they just might find out who they are and where they belong, if they don't crash out and burn first. Flying Circus runs on a heavily modified version of the Powered by the Apocalypse framework, originally developed by Vincent and Megumi Baker, but adds many additional systems and mechanical details to make the experience of flight authentic and authentically dangerous. Central to the experience of daring aerial warfare in a freeform environment without maps or miniatures, constrained instead by airspeed and altitude. The game models the behaviors and characteristics of early aircraft in detail, both fictional and historical models, and is paired with a complex and highly detailed aircraft construction system. It can seem a little dense to learn, and there are a lot of moving parts. It can be intimidating at first, but when you master the system, you'll be able to fly. The setting. Flying Circus is set in a fantasy world on the continents of Himmelgard, a sprawling landmass of soaring mountains and tangled forest. Himmelgard draws on early 20th century rural Germany, European fairy tales, and the cozy apocalyptic aesthetics of early Ghibli, to create a world of industry and fantasy where the aeroplane is the dominant form of travel. Humans have flown since before the wheel, so there are no roads, just airways and trade winds. The wilderness is dark and full of magic. Picture a world of Hayao Miyazaki film. There are peaceful little towns and vast, beautiful landscapes, of warmth to everything, even when things are grim. Everything is rustic and worn and lived in, and most folks are decent, more or less. Aeroplanes are beautifully rendered dreams. The detritus of a long ago war litters the landscape, and in the shadow lurks things that are difficult to understand. Not long ago, Himmelgard was ruled by a number of imperial states, who carved out cities of stone and steel from the wilderness. Smoke, belching factory complexes churned forth a dizzying array of aeroplanes and war machines. An ever-widening gulf between rich and poor brought intense societal pressures, and armed conflict was used as a release valve. These petty conflicts soon sparked something far greater and more terrible. In this titanic conflict, hundreds of thousands of aircraft were produced and destroyed, and millions were marched to their deaths. Eventually, the great empires wiped each other out with poisonous gas, leaving only isolated rural communities to pick up the pieces. These communities were beset on all sides by monsters, bandits, deserters, and tyrants, and so they turned to heroes to save them. Brave pilots took up the surplus of machineries of war, painted in bright and inspiring colors, and flew in defiance. It's been about 2 decades since then. The world is recovering, and people are reconnecting with each other. But the world's no less dangerous. So flying circuses are still in the air. Some are still valiant heroes. Others are opportunists, looking to make some quick cash. But in all brave terror and death, and with every flight. Getting started. Flying Circus is a role-playing game. You, hopefully, already know what that is. If you don't, page 16 has a definition for you. This game can be played in one-shots, but is intended for multi-session campaigns. Multi-session campaign play where players need to engage with stress mechanics, finances, and long-term consequences. I know you guys are scared of those. The first session will likely be taken up entirely by setup, creating characters, and fleshing out the world. This preparation time is commonly known as Session 0. One of the players is a game master, abbreviated as GM, while the other players take on the roles of mercenary pilots that the story is about. Each of these player characters, abbreviated as PCs, are a natural-born pilot, picked from one of 10 backgrounds. These backgrounds represent their life before taking to the skies and give a cross-section of the kind of places in the world. So, you know that behind every pilot is a community with a defined character. Together, the characters form a flying circus, a mercenary company that hires itself out to settlements in need of protection, assistance, or muscle. They're an adventuring party in the traditional sense, but also a business which is often perilously close to folding under the expenses associated with keeping the planes running. Resources needed for play. Flying Circus uses printable handouts to make running the game easier. There's a lot, so determine early what you'll need to cut down on ink costs. Every player will need a background playbook, an instrument panel, and component cards or scrap paper. You should also print out the GM resources, a mastery sheet or two, and play references, plus a single company roster for the group. Having a calculator on the table might help just in case. Flying Circus uses some smaller printouts on 3x5-inch index cards, such as engine and weapon tracking cards. Most modern printers should be able to print these. Check with your library or print shop. If you can't print them, though, you can hand copy the information from the PDFs or print them on a single sheet of paper. For dice, Flying Circus uses D10s and D20s. That's a 10-sided and 20-sided dice for those out of the loop. Best practice is to have 2 D10 for every player and a large pile of D20s. A third D10 of a different color is also helpful. You should have a nice collection of tokens. The best candidates are transparent, multicolored counting chips, often used to teach kindergarten students the basics of mathematics. They are cheap. You can get hundreds of them for a pittance. Colorful, and you can see through them when you place them on sheets as trackers. You can also use them, or a stack of poker chips, to represent coins in your company's coffers. Planes. This book has 10 generic planes listed in the back of the documents, plus additional pre-made aircrafts available in PDFs online, including the 45 free starter designs in the playbook. Using these during the game is straightforward, as you only need to reference the numbers already recorded. For the most part, the rules presume players will just use the pre-made planes, and if you never move past that, that's fine. For smaller changes like swapping weapons or tuning up engine, see the plane modifying rules on page 203. These are simple and quick to use and will likely suffice for most campaigns. If you really modify a plane or design a whole new one, you'll want to use the free Aircraft Engineering PDF. These rules much more complex. I'm not reading that incorrectly. There's the typo here. These rules are much more complex than anything in the game proper, and plane design generally shouldn't take place during the course of a session. Please God, no. There are no concessions to making things easy at the table. It is designed to create interesting aircraft with realistic limitations or properties, and that's an involved process. Content and safety. Flying Circus is a game for adults. We should not be playing this game. It embraces a variety of adult themes and uses them to explore ideas surrounding identity, self-discovery, cultural histories, violence, and intimacy. It isn't intended to be edgy or shocking, but to explore these themes in a textured and mature way. For more details on how the game handles these issues, please refer to page 286. I feel like I'm reading a goddamn dictionary. Subheader: Culture, Race, and Identity. Flying Circus takes place in a fictional world modeled on a sort of idyllic rural Germany of the 19th and early 20th century. That's the 1900s, by the way. It lingers on beautiful landscapes of thick forests and soaring mountains, cozy alpine towns, and the dress and traditions of Germany, especially the cultural practices of Bavaria and military history of Persia. Okay. This is to invoke the imagery and mindset of both the First World War and Grimm's fairy tales. God damn it, it's the Brothers Grimm's. Which, along with the works of Miyazaki, are the basics of the setting. However, this imagery has a context. The mythology of a racially and culturally homogenized historical German people and homeland formed the core of propaganda spread by the Nazi Party during the Rise and Reign, and was used as part of a machine to justify and perform systematic genocide. Thus, it is important that this imagery is not used carelessly. First, there is refutation of this hateful mythology by rejecting the premise of a homogeneous people. Flying Circus built a variety of cultures, both fantastical and familiar, into the process of character creation and centers a narrative of cultural exchange. Some playbooks, especially the Skybook playbook on page 166, focus specifically on one part of these cultures. There's also the Fishers, which I don't know why they didn't mention here. The cultural groups are explicitly made phonetically diverse in order to head off any idea that you should play a white character to match the setting. Your character can look like anyone. There's no false pretense of statistical historical averages to bow to here. Players should enter this game knowing that it is Himmelgrad and is not historical Germany, nor the fascist imagining of it. It is a messy, fantastical world of many cultural groups, one where the lines between these groups in many places are ambiguous, conditional, and or changing. Jesus Christ. Moving on, next subheader. Violence and death. Violence is inherent to the conceit of Flying Circus. You are a mercenary, soldiers in a dangerous aircraft. You will get into lethal battles with both humans and non-human opponents. People will die. This can be mitigated in your play group. You could conceivably portray stunt pilots, merchant, non-verbal violence, smugglers, and so forth, but it will be present. However, this violence is portrayed. How this violence is portrayed is up to your group. It is okay to simply gloss over it, to describe a plane going down and not linger on the idea that a human would be behind the control. It is best to be morbid and honest, but not lurid or explorative. Violence and death is an unfortunately reality of cool aeroplane battles, not the main draw. God, I need to turn off the heater. Where was I? Player character death is handled with special rules in this game to keep the story moving, allowing players to decide when their story ends. There are no shocking, out-of-nowhere player character deaths in this game. You always have a choice to decide what happens to your character. It's this one. I hate this one. I'm going to hate all of you if you overuse this one. Especially you, Alice, and also Emerson to a lesser extent. Subheader next. Queer, sex, and intimacy. Flying Circus characterizes the culture of pilots in its universe as especially queer ones, both directly and through metaphor. The central narrative of every character's life is of leaving home due to an incompatibility and finding a new family of people who share your passion. This game presents sex as part of a hedonistic, thrill-seeking lifestyle it portrays. There is never need to go into any detail. You can always fade to black. If this is a problem, even implications of sex can be excised. The game's mechanics will be present, through emotionally intimate moments, but it is always there if you want it to be. Remember to always talk to one another as players around these events, before, during, and after play, and double-check that everyone is comfortable with scenes playing out at every stage. Next. Excess drinking and drug use. And an idea that comes up repeatedly in these mechanics that pilots are not kind to their bodies. They drink to excess, use drugs, and have unwise sex, and put themselves into physical dangers for the rush. The substances and methods used are named in playbooks, and it will come up very frequently as part of the game's mechanical cycle. Pilots fly, brave deaths, and then deal with the stress with whatever tools they have available. This is an area where discussion ahead of time is absolutely vital, because many people have traumatic experience about drugs and alcohol. It is important to be careful around these subjects. It is as easy as going down a list of potential vices on everyone's character sheets and crossing out any that aren't acceptable at your table. Don't interrogate one another over why, just accept it and remove it from the game. If you need to pursue the available variety of options, come up with safer alternatives or pull vices from other playbooks. Man, can't believe this book is telling us to be nice to our friends. What the fuck? God, is this the final one? It is. Youth. Flying Circus is built around the coming-of-age narrative. That's a German word. I shouldn't try to pronounce it, but I'm going to. A Bildungsroman, if you will. While an adventure game, its thematic roots are in the experience of pilots in the First World War, and the experience that those young people faced high above the trenches. We know that these pilots were as young as 16, and some may have been even younger. What the fuck? We're all hair got in my mouth. There's also a clash between our modern ideas of childhood and historical norms. The current recognition of childhood and teen years as a vulnerable time is just over a little 100 years old, and for most part of human history, the idea of a minor needing to be sheltered from violence and sex was foreign. The potential to play very young characters is unsuited for this world, is a representation of that. Talk to this theme with your fellow players. Are you uncomfortable with such young characters in your game? Is there a theme you want at the table? What do you want to confront in this context? It's okay to simply mandate that all characters are of the age of a majority and move on. The opinion to do so otherwise exists to explore if you want to. The unfortunate reality that the world are not always so kind. 2 more pages, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. Safety tools, yay. Having safety tools at the table will improve your game. Not only will you be safeguarding the well-being of the participants, but players and GMs alike will be more willing to tackle uncomfortable subjects when they know there's always a way to back out. You will climb higher with a safety line. Before you start, go back to the previous section and ask each player at the table what their comfort levels are with each of those topics. It can be helpful at the beginning to specify topics which you wish to see handled carefully and which you wish simply never come up. You should talk about what you do want to see. It is okay to want your game to go to dark places. Remember, anything in this book can be changed or left out. It's okay to simply ignore certain threats, veto background moves, remove playbooks entirely, and rewrite the world to be friendlier to your group. Do not try to compromise people's boundaries and err on the side of caution. Come on, people. Okay, I do want to, very quickly pause. On page 15, it does mention a BDSM technique. So I guess you'll be seeing that in half a second. At the table, during plays, it is vital that pausing play for any reason be completely normalized. GM should lead by example, calling frequent pauses and encouraging players to do the same. The GM must make a habit of stopping and asking if players are comfortable and wish to continue, especially in tense moments. Often people who are overwhelmed will not be in a position to call for a halt. You must be proactive. It is also important to put tools in the hand of players, even if it is not on their own. The exact method is not important, but it's the most consistent and should be used regularly. This is it. A simple system is to adopt a stoplight safe word from BDSM, using agreed upon signals, words, or phrases. Classically, red, yellow, green to indicate please stop, dial it back, but don't stop, play. And this is good. More of this, please. Remember, though, this is no substitute for checking on each other. God, I love a book that encourages BDSM techniques. Give me a second while I screenshot that. Gotta share the BDSM quote with the group chat. The conversation. A role-playing game is a conversation, guys, that creates a compelling story through actions and reactions. The rules govern this conversation by providing prompts and limiting or prescribing outcomes, creating twists and turns, and pushing things in new directions. It is like a dance. It can be orderly or chaotic, carefully planned or spontaneous. But the best are intense and intimate and scandalize any old folks you might be watching. What the fuck? Sorry, you're sick. The conversation in Flying Circus has a certain familiar rhythm. The GM establishes the circumstances and the stakes, acting as the eyes and ears of the characters. The players describe how their characters act in light of what they know and ask clarifying questions. The GM adjusts and refines the circumstances in a reaction, and the cycle repeats. Or, more simply, this thing happens, and it's important. What do you do? I do this. What happens when I do this? Cool. That causes this to happen. What do you do now? This is another basic unit of role-playing. Players and GMs keep reacting to one another, and that makes the story happen. Everything else is bookkeeping. The most important part of the conversation is to roll with it. Hey, that's a good name for a group. When the GM introduces new information, the players react to this information in the fiction rather than argue about it. When the players try to do something outlandish or impossible, the GM always tries to work it in anyway, asking clarify responses, rolling the dice, or saying yes instead of shutting it down in or out of the fiction. The important thing is to keep in mind what has come before. Don't invalidate previously established fiction. Remember who characters are and what limitations have been placed on the outside world. Work within those boundaries. We use rules in role-playing games to make things happen that we don't want to happen. We want to face danger and uncertainty. We want to use these impartial systems to shape our experience. If the GM makes something bad happen to you out of the blue, that can be upsetting. That can be an upsetting interpersonal experience. When the rule tells you your wing smells bad, what? When the rule tells you your wing snaps off, well, that's just roll of the dice, isn't it? The next section is the core rules.